Well, good day, everyone. C'est une joie d'être avec vous aujourd'hui. My name is Corey Andrew Lebrec. I
Really
have
happy to
the
be with you.
incredible privilege of serving as president of the Canadian Bioethics Society and of working alongside a stellar board of exceptional people in our field who are given to the mission of the society to gather and to listen to the many different voices in bioethics from across the country. Welcome to this session of Conversations in Canadian Bioethics, which is a virtual series bringing to the fore amazing speakers engaging in pressing topics of interest to the Canadian bioethics community and creating a forum where we can reflect together in a constructive way. My gratitude to Meredith Schwartz, our new initiatives officer, not only for leading the organization of this series, but for her attentiveness and commitment to assuring that different voices in the field are welcome to the table, listened to, and learned from. So there are a few ways that you can join our conversation today. We're very fortunate to have live simultaneous interpretation available for this session in both English and French. To hear everything in one particular language, please select the language from the interpretation icon at the bottom of your screen. And closed captions is also available for this event. We will also be holding a discussion period at the end of the exchange. However, you may enter a question at any time using the Q&A function. So not the chat function, but the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. You can write in your question either in French or in English. Your name will not be mentioned alongside your question. However, it will be seen by other participants once the question has been answered live. If you don't wish your name to be seen by others, please select the option to ask your question anonymously. We also welcome your feedback about this session or suggestions for topics for future sessions in this series. So you can contact us at administrator@cbs-scb.ca for that, or reach out to one of the board members for more information there. We are grateful, to have received a grant from the Department of Canadian Heritage, which generously assists organizations like ours in providing services in both French and English at public events. And we're very thankful for their support this year. So just to remind you, this session is being recorded and it will be available on the CBS YouTube website. The address you can find at the very bottom of your screen, or you can just Google Canadian Bioethics Society and you'll be able to find us easily. For those of you who are new to us, the Canadian Bioethics Society is a national network for anyone interested in ethics issues related to human health and the biological sciences. We collaborate with people from across the country to serve, as I said, as a gathering space, as a growing network for voices in our field. You may be interested in joining us as an individual member who will then have access to the CBS membership directory. We'll have opportunities to join CBS interest groups, which I'll mention in just a moment. You'll have reduced rates on eligible conferences and event registrations, and also the potential to serve on our fantastic board. We're also privileged to have organizational members from across Canada who partner with the Society to contribute to advancing bioethics in the country. Designated leaders from our membership organizations join our organizational members leaders forum. And this forum fosters networking among Canadian bioethics organizations and coordinates projects and initiatives in areas of relevance to our members and the bioethics community writ large. So in addition to participation in the forum, another important benefit for organizational members includes discounted individual membership fees for all members or employees of the organization. So if you're interested in becoming an individual member or an organizational member, please feel free to visit our website. Another quick note, we have a number of interest groups that help further the CBS's mission to build bioethics capacity through the facilitation of interdisciplinary and interprofessional communities of individuals to discuss topics of shared interest. Role-based groups, right, like the Ethics Fellowship Directors Group or the Practicing Healthcare Ethicists Group exist, as well as topics-based groups. So Indigenous bioethics, disability and bioethics, AI, end of life, rural and remote bioethics, nursing, environmental bioethics, and one of the groups that I have a great privilege of leading, religion and bioethics, which in some ways helped bring today's session into being with a shared focus on spirituality and bioethics. And there are a whole host of other interest groups that you can certainly join. And it's one of the great benefits of being a CBS member, right? Being connected to these fantastic groups and belonging to a network of thinkers and practitioners from around the country. So do be sure to check out the website. And on the website, you'll also find some information about our upcoming Bioethics Community Forum, which is focused on the theme trust and distrust in uncertain times. So during the forum, there'll be peer-reviewed presentations, virtual posters, short snappers, oral presentations, workshops, and so much more. It's a 4-day event that is held on May 20th, May 21st, and then May 27th and May 28th. So do see the website for information and in good time to register. So I'm delighted to announce also that the Canadian Bioethics Society, in partnership with the Canadian Journal of Bioethics, is offering students a wonderful publication opportunity for today's session of the conversation series. So this initiative is designed to provide students with the chance to develop their reflections from the event into a conference proceedings submission. So students who sign up for this will have the opportunity to work with a mentor, to discuss their ideas and receive guidance while preparing a short paper based on themes discussed in today's session. Participants will also receive feedback from the CBS team before submitting their work to the Canadian Journal of Bioethics. I wish I had that kind of mentorship experience in academic writing and in the scholarly publication process when I was a student. And so here you are. So students who are interested can register by contacting the email address that you see at the bottom of your screen here, students at CBS-SCB.ca. So although participation does not guarantee publication, since submissions must meet the journal's editorial standards, students will be well accompanied and the process itself will be incredibly fruitful. Let me pause here to give our land acknowledgement, and this I will do in French.
Land acknowledgement is not a protocol without any meaning, but rather a conscious way of expressing one's solidarity, a way to respect and acknowledge Indigenous peoples as the purveyors of knowledge regarding the traditional territory. It is not a series of words that we just express to have the feeling that we've done our part, whatever that is, but rather an engagement to be conscious of our participation in colonialism in its current and past forms, and our sincere willingness to work towards healing and reconciliation. I acknowledge that I am in an Indigenous territory that was never ceded. I acknowledge the Ganyahaga Nation, who is the nation to which these territories belong. Jujagi, Montreal, historically was known as a gathering place for many First Nations and is today a place where many different peoples, including Indigenous peoples, live. And it is with respect for the past, the present, and the future that we acknowledge the relationships between Indigenous peoples and other persons in the Montreal area. Each time a land acknowledgement is made, we must remind ourselves that we are all called on to identify and counter those things that make us that other Indigenous peoples and people around us.
Today's session, Healthcare Through an Indigenous Lens, is an exciting one. It will be an interesting reflection, a good discussion between two speakers who we are really thrilled to have with us today. Dr. Kathleen Absalon, professor in the Indigenous Field of Study, Master of Social Work program at Wilfrid Laurier University, and director of the Center for Indigeology, is with us. Kathy is Anishinaabe from Flying Post First Nation. Welcome, Kathy. We also have with us Dr. Christine Jameson, who is a professor in the Department of Theological Studies at Concordia University in Montreal. Christine is an expert in bioethics, framing ethical deliberation, and Indigenous spiritualities. She's a member of the Boothroyd First Nation Interior Salish, located in the Fraser Canyon in British Columbia. Welcome, Christine. It's so good to have you both. Let me pass the baton over, if I may, to Valerie Thomas Litao, who is a doctoral candidate in the Humanities PhD program at Concordia University in Montreal, specializing in spirituality, ethics, and social theory in healthcare, and who has for many years participated in the research and programming domain at the McGill University Health Center, has taught in different universities in Montreal. So we are in very good hands with Valerie. Valerie, over to you.
Thank you, Corey. It's a great pleasure to be here today with Dr. Kathleen Absalon and Dr. Christine Jameson, and with you all to reflect on healthcare through an Indigenous lens. Thank you to the Canadian Bioethics Society, especially to Corey, to Meredith, Andrew, and the two interpreters that are making it possible for us today to have this conversation. So to begin, as we should, we only have about an hour and 15 minutes left for these big questions to explore together. So to begin the conversation, I would like to ask Dr. Absalon and Dr. Christine Jameson how you understand the theme of today's discussion. How would you describe what health or well-being means from the perspective of your traditions?
So I'll go first. I think it's important the recognition that there are many different traditions in Canada, many different Indigenous lenses in a sense. And I'm coming from the Inkakatma people, which are part of the Fraser Canyon, and I've just really been getting to know my people in the last 15 or so years. It's really a privilege. I guess to really respond to your question, I would think of kind of three things when I think about health from an Indigenous lens, particularly, say, focused on my people, but I also have come to know quite a bit about the Anishinaabe people because of my relationship with Kathy and doing the certificate and educator's certificate in Indigeology at Wilfrid Laurier. So there are kind of three things that I would say are important in terms of health. The land, I think that we need the importance of recognizing that Indigenous peoples are so connected to land that it's part of their identity, part of our language, and that being dislodged from our land, being dislocated, is really a determinant for issues around health and health problems. I think that that's one issue. A second issue, a second factor, I would say, are our cultures, our teachings, and our stories, how important those are for good health and thinking about health through an Indigenous lens. I would say that our culture, our teachings, and our stories are important. The importance of elders who carry traditional knowledge and communicate it to the younger generations. And finally, I'll just say something about Indigenous spirituality, because I think from my understanding, all of existence is spiritual for most Indigenous peoples. It's not a separate category. It's deep, and our spirituality is deeply rooted in the land. And so I just think of things like when I think of Indigenous spirituality or spiritualities, I think of a kind of a holistic lens that all living beings are spiritual beings, and that all our relationships to all beings are part of part of the promotion of health. I think for Indigenous people, the recognition and the importance of our relationships with all our relations, all our relatives, which include all beings on this earth. So I'll stop there and let Kathy say a few words.
Miigwech, Christine. First of all, I do want to announce myself in my own language and situate myself here and sound my voice and bojo ni minogiji gonkwe ndishnakas wabshishi and odem ni mama makwando dem flying post treaty line donjaba kitchener and Diane me moi Brit and Diane Mijomade Ojibwe and Anishinaabe Kwandao and that was important to me because that's part of what health or well-being means to me. It's to know who I am. It's to know my meaning and my purpose in this earth lodge. And for any human being, I don't think this goes for just Indigenous people, but for any human being, having a sense of autonomy, having a sense of control over one's life, having a sense of empowerment to live the life, to live in the way the Creator for us, the Creator put us here. To have the spiritual, the emotional, the mental, the physical power to live our life in accordance with our own values and within our own traditions, and to be supported in that way and to be respected in that way. To me, that is what health and well-being is, when a people can live in alignment with who they are ethnically, in relationship to their environment, their geography, when they can be and carry out the roles and the responsibilities that align with their own kinship and community connections, then they might be able to say they have a good life, that they have relationships, that they are connected to creation, they're connected to their kinship and their community system. I know when I feel that, I have more of a sense of health and well-being. When I have a sense of control and autonomy over how I live, that gives me health and well-being. That's a short answer, because I know there's a lot more questions.
Thank you very much. It's so fascinating to listen to you, because we can really see the difference between this type of holistic view and a mechanistic view that would isolate us from our roots to the land, our roots to our stories, our traditions. So what both of you are saying is interesting, how you're both connecting health and well-being to a holistic view of who you are in relationship to your land, to your traditions. And health is not only a mechanistic or individual functional or functioning of the organic body, but it's the larger body and how it interconnects and how the relations are built. So that's very interesting to start off the conversation. We're already opening the horizon beyond perhaps a narrow view of health to something that involves relations, like you said, Christine, with all beings, and with who we are in relation to all those beings. So thank you for that. In relation to that, the next question I would like to ask you is, what are some Indigenous teachings or ceremonies that contribute to the health of Indigenous people? So you were talking about the teachings and stories, Christine, and the importance of elders and traditions. What are some of these Indigenous teachings or ceremonies that are particularly significant?
Well, I guess again, I don't know why I keep jumping in first, but if you don't mind, Kathy, I'll because I'm so nervous, maybe. Anyway, I was thinking about something that I've done a fair amount of exploration of are the seven sacred or seven grandfather or seven grandmother teachings. And those teachings are, I learned a lot about those from John Boros. He he's a Anishinaabe professor at the University of Toronto from the law background, but he's an amazing writer and amazing human being. And he talks a lot about the seven teachings. So the seven teachings are in the Anishinaabe language. I'm not obviously a fluent Anishinaabe speaker like Kathleen, but I've learned some words. And what's interesting about the seven teachings is that they come from the land. They come from the land. The land teaches us, for example, how the word for love in Anishinaabe is Zagidawin. And at least that's how I pronounce it. I hope that's close. But if you break down that word, Zagin means the mouth of a river. And so if you think about the mouth of a river, it's the place where nutrients gather, where it's a place of a lot of flourishing. And species gather there to be nourished, and it's a place of not only human flourishing, but a place of all the animal flourishing, plant flourishing. And so, just again, I'm just drawing from John Boros. He says that if Zagidawin is the word for love in Anishinaabe, so the mouth of a river teaches us something about what love is. And so we learn through the teachings, we learn from the land what love is, and we've learned from the land what wisdom is, and what respect is, what bravery is, what humility is, what etc. So these are the sacred teachings, the grandfather or grandmother teachings. And I think, through these teachings, we learn to be a good person. We learn to walk a good road. The teachings really promote our health and well-being. And from my own tradition, the Inca people, they have their own principles. And I'm not at all fluent. I'm learning Inca machine, but I'm not fluent, so I'm not going to say the Inca machine words for these teachings because I'd be laughing stock of my people. But for example, one of the first teachings is knowing we are connected, land, animals, plants, and people. And a second teaching is celebrating people and land joyously. A third one is developing lifelong learning and wisdom. Fourth, giving lovingly to family and community. Fifth, succeeding in endeavors. Seventh, utilizing Inklakatma vision-seeking methods. And then incorporating Inklakatma knowledge and reflecting on learning and relearning lifelong lessons. So these are examples of teachings. And these teachings, certainly how I've come to understand it with my own people, they come through stories, stories of mostly grandmothers. The grandmothers tend to, in the Inklakatma tradition, the grandmothers tend to be the storytellers. And these teachings come down through the grandmothers, and they teach us how to live in a good way. And I think these teachings and ceremonies that we also have promote health and well-being. So that would be kind of how I would understand that. Yeah.
Oh. Thank you, Christine. Thanks.
And I feel like my answer, like everything Christine said, is I agree with and I've experienced, and within my Anishinaabe worldview is we have ceremonies for everything. We have ceremonies from cradle to grave, when life comes into this world to when life leaves this world. We have ceremonies, and for everything in between. There is a ceremony for the stages of life as somebody goes along their life path. There are different nations have different ceremonies for different things. When a young woman or a young girl or a young boy goes through their change of life, we have ceremonies to help them understand the changing roles and responsibilities that occur and how the community or family will now regard them, and how those the changes in their body now bring upon another set of responsibilities and roles within the family and within the community. And embedded in our ceremonies are songs. We also have songs for everything. We have birth songs, death songs, we have leadership songs, we have women's songs, men's songs, we have children's songs, we have healing songs, we have death, like I think I said death songs, we have celebration songs, we have clan songs, we have songs about gratitude, we have songs about different beings in creation. And these songs also carry in them, like what Christine was saying, stories are embedded in those songs. And teachings, those songs embed teachings. And so when you think about ceremonies, or you think about what teachings contribute to the health of Indigenous people, like everything, all of those ceremonies, how can I describe this? All of those ceremonies and those teachings and those spiritual or cultural practices that we do are for our health and well-being. They're actually foundational to our health and well-being. They are what and who we are as Anishinaabeg people. And embedded in those teachings and ceremonies are, I guess you could say, knowledges that not only help us to understand how we're to be with each other as human beings, and they're knowledges that help us to understand, more importantly, how we are to be within creation. Knowing that creation is what gives us life. Life comes from all of those natural elements, like the moon, our grandfather the sun, our grandmother the moon, our mother the earth. That's our original family. And so our kinship system extends beyond human beings. It extends to the earth, what's under the earth, what's on the earth, what's amongst the earth, what's above the earth, and beyond. Like, our kinship system is quite vast and comprehensive. And so when we bring our teachings and our ceremonies into talking about health or health care, it's not separate for us. So when we bring, for example, can I give you an example of when my last I have 4 grandchildren. So when my last little granddaughter was born, we were at the hospital, and they only let the father in the birth room. And I'm the kokum. Oh, the father and the doula. So my daughter had an Indigenous doula, which was wonderful. She was able to find an Indigenous woman to be her birthing doula. And so only 2 people were allowed in the birthing room. So me as the kokum And the mother of my daughter wasn't allowed in there. So mainstream healthcare separates us from like that birth was a ceremony. And so it was the hospital was also, we had to advocate for bringing in our smudge, for bringing in our medicines, for bringing in the things that we needed to bring in to catch that baby, metaphorically, in the way that we were always meant to catch those babies when they come into this world. Like, it's like catching them with an eagle feather in our hand. And that cedar water, ready to give them their first bath in our traditional medicine, which is cedar water, and not to have them scrubbed down by somebody who is seeing that as a medical safety procedure, but by the loving hands of the aunties and the kokums. And so we were able to have our cedar bath for the baby, and then we were able to find a spot in the hospital. The nurses were wonderful in saying we need to have like the ceremony to welcome the baby into the world, and we had that within the first 24 hours, like very shortly after the baby. So then that mother had to get transported to this other spot. The baby had to get transported to this other spot. We had a moss bag at Tikanagan, like we had our medicines there for this baby, for this little being, and so that this baby could be welcomed into this earth. It's not just a baby, it's a spirit for us. Like, that is still such a pure spirit to come into this earth lodge, that we really have to do that in such a loving way, because for us, that's a spirit that's made its journey here and is now coming in this little vessel and has to figure out how to operate this little vessel. So it's like the spirit meets the human body. And so our ceremonies are like a way of helping that spirit to reconcile that journey of coming into this earthly world and now a little vessel. And so, and then the ones that are on the other end of this earth lodge that are crossing over into the spirit world, it's like their earthly body is done its work, and now the spirit's ready to cross over and return home. And as important as the birthing ceremonies are, the death ceremonies are equally as important in how we work in healthcare, like in places like hospice or palliative care units and in health units, like how they're set up to accommodate like extended families and people who need to come in and help that one make their spirit journey. Like, this is really important stuff for us. And so those ceremonies and those teachings are foundational. So for me, for example, I didn't know who I was as an Anishinaabe person when I came. Like Christine is finding out, in the last 15 years, like, because of colonial violence, many of us have had to recover, like basically go and search and figure out, who am I? And this is an epidemic as a result of the colonial violence. And so in the recovery of our identity, of our culture, of our language, and how we are in how we are today, there is a whole process of, like, for us to learn. Like, for example, our Anishinaabe names are spiritual names. When I received my spiritual name, for example, the naming ceremony, when I first received my name in a naming ceremony, I was like amazed. And I was also now started a journey of, like, what does this mean? Minugiji Gonkwe. Or I had another name before that, Negiza Sabe Nabe Kwe. I am the sun looking at you, woman. Minogijigonkwe means I am shining day woman, the one that brings goodness and beauty to the day. And that name says something about my spirit and my identity. It has helped me to walk through this Earth Lodge, the challenging things, even when I'm confronted with ugliness or negativity or toxicity. I am reminded I am Minogijigonkwe. I am shining day woman, the one that brings goodness to the day. And I have to be careful of the contaminants. So I have to, it reminds me how I am to stand and walk through this Earth Lodge and the medicine I carry in creation. And our naming ceremonies are really important for our identity. And so we have women's ceremonies, men's ceremonies, the queer LGBTQ2 spirit community have ceremonies, and a lot of that has been marginalized or erased. So, we have folks in our community, in our rainbow communities, who are in the process of restoring those ceremonies. And in our lodges, we're finding ways to embrace everybody. And so there are so many ceremonies, and they are all connected to this relationship we have with where life comes from. And how do we enact that and activate that and translate that in our earthly life? So they're helping us to live in this Earth Lodge and to have relationships with each other and with where life comes from in a manner where we do not compromise the integrity of the earth. We do not compromise the integrity of the biodiversity of the earth. So our ceremonies are also connecting us to the natural environment, and it reminds us that we're not to live in a way that compromises where life comes from. The earth, the air, the water, the plants, the animals. It's all connected for us, which I don't think mainstream understands. They just want to have silos, and they just want to deal with health in a very segregated manner, which is very difficult for us to help people in healthcare to understand. It's connected. Like when people are coming into the world or going out, we have our ceremonies, and there's a reason for that.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking us through this. It's like a journey, listening to you both. And I think we have a lot to learn in the healthcare system that is itself very fragmented. Like you're saying, it's a fragmented, dislocated body in itself. Earlier, you were talking, Christine, about this dislocated sort of identity, but it seems like our systems are also dislocated, especially in healthcare. And the way you talk about ceremonies as that which allows us which allows you to reconnect and to have a sense of continuity and profound respect for the transitions and changes of life and death in relation to the earth as well. I think in our systems, it's interesting. Our healthcare system, some of the biggest gaps have to do with transitions of care. Interestingly enough, there's all kinds of discrepancies in these trajectories, and the transitions are there's almost no words or no space for them. So listening to you talk about how ceremonies help to accompany those transitions and put words on them and reconnect to the larger picture is something that's gravely missing, I think, in our Western healthcare system. your example of your granddaughter is striking. And also listening to Christine when you were talking about love and the mouth of the river, the river's mouth. It's like the creation speaks as well, right? There's a form of listening to the earth. It has a mouth, it speaks, and I find that such a striking image as well. That it is not inanimate, it's not an object to manipulate, but it's a living, speaking almost being.
Yeah, it's the land is our teacher. That's the way I kind of understand it and how I feel it. There's so much to learn. It's kind of like a natural law in a sense, that we learn how to be and how to act in the world from the land. The land is teaching us, and I've come to understand that more deeply in the last few years, and I just realize how much more I have to learn in terms of wholeness and health and well-being from the land, and from my relationship to the land. And I mean, it's remarkable. I live just near a park. I can see the park from my apartment, and I can see the St. Lawrence River. And when the weather's nice, there's so many people out there, and there's just something so innate in us that we realize how important it is to be connected to the land and the water, and how that is what brings us wholeness and well-being. And people, I think, just understand that at a very instinctual level. That's why they're just out there when the weather's beautiful, and even when it's not so beautiful, they're out there. And yeah, it's just what we have to learn from the land. And I guess for me, becoming more conscious of that is really important. Becoming more conscious of, and it's like what Kathy said, the land is part of our health and well-being. It's all interconnected. And the more we harm ourselves, the more we harm the land, and the more we harm the land, the more we harm ourselves. It's just a kind of we're so connected to everything. So I just wanted to kind of emphasize that.
And I want to add to what you're saying, Christine, because what you're saying, I don't want to forget about this. Like, we're so connected to the land, and I'll share a little story with you about how that is. In our Anishinaabe creation story, it's a very comprehensive story, and I've only ever heard it comprehensively told orally. Well, for the most part, it's only shared orally in ceremonies, in our lodges. And I am a Midewiwin, and I belong to a Midewiwin lodge, and I go to a different number of different Midewiwin lodges, and that's the only place you'll hear certain teachings and ceremonies is in those lodges, because we don't want them to become colonized. So one of those beautiful teachings I've heard over the years is our creation story, our Anishinaabe creation story. And this speaks to the whole process of creation and and our mother, the earth. And it also has stories in there about how we human beings came to be. And the spirit that came from that beautiful realm, the creator's world, which is a different realm. And the spirit, and when the creator was wondering, where am I going to place this spirit? The paradox is that the creator placed that spirit in a place where humans wouldn't really look. And so the creator fashioned the first being, the earth, after the earth. So the first human being is fashioned. If it's me, it's like this, nice and curvy. Just kidding. And then, we say that I try to remind people, like, 80% of the earth is water, 80% of us is water. That's not a coincidence. And when you see, like, the imprints of our fingerprints, and then the imprints of tree, they're the same. or our irises, and you see the different solar systems, they're the same. Like, we are fashioned, we were created out of the earth, because the earth was here first. Everything in creation was here first, and so the creator took the clay from the earth and the brown earth and fashioned us, and took the hair, in our teachings, it's for me to keep my hair long, it's like that's my power, and that's connected to the sweetgrass of the earth, like that long grass. That's like the hair. The hair of Mother Earth is the grass. This is our grass. And the rocks, all those rocks are the bones of Mother Earth, are like what we have, her bones. And all that oil and is like our blood. And her vital organs are our vital organs. So like all of those precious minerals and stones in the earth are our vital organs. And her limbs, like the trees, are our limbs. And so what we do to her is going to happen to us. This is a very important understanding that is embedded in our worldview, that we have known for since time immemorial, is that what happens to the earth happens to us. If her water is sick, our water is sick. If her bones are being desecrated and being blown up, you're going to see more brittle and bone disease. If her vital organs are being extracted and attacked, you're going to see a lot of and we're seeing that, a lot of autoimmune diseases today. You're going to see a lot of blood diseases today. So the health of the earth, if you want to look at what the trajectory is for us as human beings in terms of health, all you have to do is take an examination of what's happening to the earth, because we are of the earth. This is a core fundamental worldview that's embedded in Indigenous nations across Turtle Island here, but I believe also across the globe. What happens to her happens to us. And that is fundamentally why we have always been very careful what we do with the earth, what we put in the water, what we put into the air, how we treat the land, that we don't extract, and we're not into, precious mineral extraction for ego or personal whatever adornment. And if we do, it's all in moderation, to not compromise the integrity of the air, the water, the land, the plants, the medicines, the biodiversity, the ecology, the ecological strength of the land, because we're basically then compromising our own health. So thank you for that segue, Christine. That's a really important, core fundamental belief system and value system, and that's natural law, and it's true.
Yeah.
It's like understanding the earth as a body and our body within that body connected, which is greatly needed, I think, also in the way that we understand identity, right? I think when you talk about identity, you're not talking about an isolated person, a disconnected identity. When you're talking about identity in terms of how that connects to health, being knowing who you are and where you come from, that sense of identity is always relational, right? It's an identity that is connected not only to your body as a physical person, but to the greater bodies around that shape it. And I think that's a really interesting and important aspect, because we tend to individualize identity today as me, myself, and I. and my health and is my issues. And so I think that's really interesting. And I wonder what you would think of which social or environmental conditions mostly affect can strongly affect Indigenous health today in terms of the greater body. What social and environmental conditions affect Indigenous health today?
Well, I could go on. I could talk about that for a long time. I could talk about like for like the water, for example, right? 80%, 80. So water contamination and the how First Nations in Canada don't have good drinking water. Like this is a huge this is an important issue to remember. And so the the condition of the water, the condition of the environment. People up in Grassy Narrows are still dealing with mercury poison and contamination in the water, and the ongoing emergence of like in Ontario, and we're dealing with the potential ring of fire, the development of mining and industry, and the impact that that's going to have, and the lack of accountability that industry has for the way in which the earth is damaged, and environmental cleanups they're not being held accountable for environmental cleanups. And so there's that whole piece of environmental racism. I want to name that. That's environmental racism, and where Indigenous First Nations have been located, and how Indigenous communities have been marginalized, so that colonial governments could extract and exploit the rich resources of the land. And that's had an impact on the health of Indigenous peoples. Like, it's not Jordan's principle is a guiding principle that arose out of a young Indigenous person who was stuck between the federal and the provincial jurisdictional debates of who's going to pay for the hospital bill. And then, and the First Nations Caring Society also talks about Shannon's dreams. Shannon Kuchiching, I think, was like she had to go to school, a public school, on a toxic waste site was where the public school was built. Like, how is that okay that Indigenous children, Indigenous school sites are built in contaminated and toxic spaces? And so the degree to which environmental racism happens and continues to happen in this country contributes to Indigenous people's health, or the disproportionate stats of Indigenous people's health. And so I think things like food insecurity, the erosion of fishing and hunting and trapping lands for Indigenous nations and territories, and industries impacting the migration patterns of caribou, of moose, the climate crisis, and what's happening with the polar bears, and up in the Arctic and in the far north, in the hamlets of the territories. Like, these are issues globally that are happening here, and absolutely 100%, the environmental conditions have an impact on the health of Indigenous peoples and communities. Without a doubt, you can't talk about Indigenous health without looking around at where people are living, what they're eating, what kind of cultural values they're able to, lifestyles, whether they've been relocated, whether they've been relocated and then they've been rebuilt on whatever, like toxic sites that have been buried. You can't look at the health of Indigenous people without taking an environmental scan. The two are intricately linked.
I just wanted to kind of add to that. I couldn't more agree with you, Kathy, because I was thinking about when I was talking earlier about the seven sacred teachings, I was thinking about the teaching of wisdom. I can't remember the Anishinaabe word for that, but my understanding of wisdom is that it has to do with light, it has to do with this capacity to see in the distance. And that's, I think, exactly what Kathy's talking about is this possibility of recognizing like what we're doing, what are the long-term ramifications of what we're doing. It reminds me of an article I read by a woman named Charlotte Reading, who now her name is Loppy, but when she wrote this article, it was called she was called Charlotte Reading, and the well, it's a book, but she wrote an article. She has a chapter in it. She edited, was one of the editors of the book. It's called Determinants of Indigenous Peoples' Health in Canada. And what she does in that book, in that article, is she identifies three different levels of health. And one is sort of and she uses the image of a tree to to kind of talk about what she calls the proximal, the immediate kind of issues that are in our face. We see them all the time. They're obvious problems of, the problems of some of the things that, Kathy was mentioning, food scarcity, water problems, and the kinds of diseases that Indigenous peoples tend to have because of nutrition and things like that. Those are kind of the proximal, what she called proximal. And then she talks about the intermediate, which are more things like what kind of feeds into those problems, like, and that can be both positive and negative. Like for examples, what we were talking about earlier, the importance of ceremony, the importance of storytelling, the importance of culture, spirituality, that these feed into the health of all of us, but particularly since we're talking about Indigenous peoples. But the third one is what she calls distal determinants. And these are the things that I think Kathy was really alluding to, things like colonialism, racism, social exclusion, repression of self-determination. These are the deep, deep issues that are affecting Indigenous health on Turtle Island. Colonialism itself has, it's the fingers or the streams of colonialism still continue to choke us in a very real way. They haven't gone, even though there's more recognition of the problem of colonialism, but it still has an impact. And so I just think, that these are really some of the basic roots of some of the problems, some of the really dire issues that Indigenous peoples today are facing, particularly in remote communities where, there just aren't the services there that are needed. And why is that, and why don't we have water in these communities? Good drinking water. I mean, these are the questions that continually are being asked and nobody's paying attention to them. So I just wanted to so I just was thinking about that article by Charlotte Reading or Loppy when Kathy was talking. Yeah.
And it's happening right here in front of us, right? It's we don't need to look far away for these injustices that are right there. But somehow, like you said, the wisdom is lacking in that there's a kind of willful blindness, turning a blind eye perhaps to these issues, sadly. And I guess considering Indigenous health, it requires us to broaden our understanding of health in the first place. We can't reproduce the same individualized understanding of health. If we want to consider Indigenous health, we have to broaden that perspective to consider these very real issues that are affecting so many people. So thank you for bringing those issues up. And I wonder what changes you think hospitals could make in our very complicated healthcare systems that we have here. How can hospitals and clinics feel safer, more welcoming, and tackle some of these issues that are much broader systemic issues? What role can healthcare play in tackling some of these issues and welcoming, creating spaces for Indigenous health?
Do you want me to go first, Christine?
Sure. Yeah, go ahead, Kathy.
I think about my family, right? I think coming at this from a very practical place, in terms of when my family or myself or who are visibly Indigenous, like we're visibly racialized people, and there's no question about who we are. And when that's the case, that I think that it's really important that healthcare systems and hospitals have positions for Indigenous patient advocates, and that within the administration or within hospital systems that there are Indigenous advisory boards, or more or less a place where Indigenous patients and service users have a place to share their experiences and their concerns, that there's a place where where there's a landing pad to hear what people's experiences are if a hospital wants to really improve, or healthcare. It might be a clinic, it might be like healthcare is pretty vast. Whatever the system is, if they really want to improve, they really have to have a landing place for the voices of the people to share their experiences so that they can listen to them, and in that way build more relationships with communities, with the people that, so if it's people that have to fly in, like say you're in Montreal and you have people that are flying in from the north, James Bay up in the north, that often come to a place like Montreal or Ottawa or service cities where hospitals are often in service towns, that there could be more accessible accommodations. If people have to travel for dialysis or chemotherapy, or they have to, whatever the healthcare, right? That they're not having to stay in hotels that are today charging like $300 a night, on top of flying in and out of their communities to access healthcare. So creating more accessible healthcare, like accessible healthcare is a huge issue. As I prepared for this talk, I did research, and across the board, accessible healthcare comes right up as a number one issue, and that could be as a result of a lot of like those social determinants of health, like inadequate housing, poverty, food insecurity, like not having economic stability. All kinds of things could contribute to, let alone like the hospital itself, the experience of people who are going to the hospital that are treated poorly, or are dealing with systemic racism or discrimination by people who aren't trained to work with Indigenous people. So there could be like language barriers, or people are treated poorly as if they're, this is like a really like, these are gut-wrenching reminders about how racism manifests in these systems. So, I took my mom to the Emerge, and she was dealing with her liver failure, and in the emergency room, the healthcare staff gave everybody else a supper. And I said, what about my mother? And they said to me, oh, you can go to Tim Hortons. Like, the kitchen's closed. And I said, that's not going to work. And I went and got the doctor on call who changed it right away. But the attitude of the nurses was terrible towards my mother. The degree of discrimination and treating our people as if we're homeless or we're drunks or we don't deserve to be treated with integrity or respect. That really bothers me when I am in the healthcare system and I see our people, even if they are struggling, that they need to be treated with respect. They need to be treated with kindness, like we deserve kindness. And so there's a lot of work that has to happen in healthcare systems to train and decolonize people's minds out of the kind of like colonial thinking or systemic racism that exists within hospitals. And so I'm not sure if I'm talking about how we change it, but I definitely think that people need education so that they can see Indigenous people not as like derelicts of society, but like the degree of health issues that people are experiencing, whether it's life expectancy, mortality, the opiate crises, addictions, and mental health. These are like these are direct impacts of the degree of colonial violence that Indigenous people have experienced in this country, and then to turn around and treat them like derelicts of society when people are having these very human responses to inhumane conditions is quite a paradox that happens over and over and over in this country. So I feel like there needs to be definitely critical education happening. And on the ground, like having patient advocates investing in those. And I know in some of the areas, like in some healthcare centers, they started investing in having, Indigenous spiritual rooms, healing rooms, so people could go and smudge and people could go be there with their families. And those were positive changes that I saw happen. I don't know if they continued staffing them. I think, unfortunately, when healthcare gets cut, those last things that were created are often the first things that get cut. And it's a very it just goes to show you that we can move forward, but sometimes we end up taking 2 steps forward, 4 steps back in making changes. When systems are crunched for funding and whatever, they start trimming what they think the fat is. And so Indigenous initiatives or changes to make healthcare more accessible are sometimes perceived as the fat that gets trimmed first. And I don't understand that either. But when healthcare does institute patient advocates or Indigenous advisory boards, or they make structural changes to creating spaces for Indigenous families to gather, or creating spaces for some of those important ceremonies, then I think that those spaces would be good for the people that are going there. I pass it over to you, Christine. I'm sure you can contribute too.
Yeah, well, I guess what struck me about how you responded to that question, Kathy, is the importance of personal relations, the importance of the human being in the system, in a sense, and having human beings in the system who are Indigenous and who understand what Indigenous peoples need. I was thinking of somebody who has always impressed me. I don't know her personally, but a doctor named Janet Smiley, who's at actually Unity Health. Is an amazing person. So people like that in the system, in a sense, are what gives me hope, that people like Janet and others, there are many others who are working in this system to try to change it. And I think that's something that's really important. I also think about my sister used to work in a personal care home in Winnipeg. It's called Southeast Personal Care Home, and it's First Nation owned and operated and respects the holistic Indigenous values and cultural traditions that nurture the health and well-being of each person. And when you go to that place, it's just so beautiful. It's shaped like it's a circle. You go in and you have five areas, five kind of houses, and they're all in a circle. And the whole building is made out of wood, like I don't know what kind of wood it is, but it's all wood, and it's just so beautiful. There's a room for ceremonies, there's a room for families. So it comes out of really a deep understanding of what Indigenous peoples need, in this case, at the end of life. And I think that, these little examples, I think, are there, and we need to kind of resource them and mine them in a sense and find out, how we can promote and promote these and help them to grow and develop more. But I just want to come back to my first statement. I just feel it has to begin with human beings. It has to begin with people. And education, I agree with Kathy, education is key there to like our implicit biases, to become aware of our implicit biases. And I mean, I believe that people are not inherently bad, but I think people have implicit biases, and that how do we learn about what those are? How do we come to understand them? To me, that's what education is about. I just think that that's where the possibility of hope can come from education. Yeah. So
The other thing I will add to that you're reminding me of, Christine, is the like healthcare is more than physicians and nurses.
hmm
And the issues that people present in healthcare are also a blend of emotional mental health. And often Indigenous people are also dealing with trauma. Could be addictions and mental health issues. It could be complex issues that are in addition to a physical health present, or biological health issue. It could also be social, spiritual, emotional health issues. And often the complexity of the layering of understanding those issues are important. And so I know in healthcare is a system that needs to acknowledge and remember that holistic healthcare means having a wide array of healthcare providers on a team. That is not just physicians, psychiatrists, nurses, and all the other specialized health modalities, and also elders, the kokums, the aunties, the people that can listen to people and provide them with that emotional, mental, spiritual support in whenever they're at whatever point in their life they're seeking healthcare, because healthcare is really a holistic issue, not just a physical issue.
So it's even the understanding of holistic healthcare that needs to be broadened even more. We tend to think of it in terms of biopsychosocial, and then we tag on spiritual to that. But you're basically saying that it's all spiritual. It's not just an extra that we tag on, that the whole view of holistic care needs to be broadened and needs to be translated in concrete terms, like you were mentioning, Kathy, by including elders, including different types of people on the team, and all the approaches to trauma, to understand the intergenerational trauma, how that's been that works through people and communities at large. So these are really important things to think about. And the way you talk about advocacy as building relationships, it's not just advocacy in terms of trying to make a point or take a stand, but it's advocacy in terms of building relationships, like the examples you gave. And I think that's very powerful to shift our understanding of advocacy as well, to broaden that also. Are there other examples of where healthcare systems might work well for Indigenous patients that you've come across?
I think that when I see, for example, community health organizations, there's one here called the Southern Ontario Aboriginal Health Access Centre. So I think when there are health access centers for Indigenous people that have a holistic grounding in them, there's a physician there, there's the nurse practitioner, there's midwives, there are mental health workers, there are youth workers, there's a cultural person, there's a traditional helper there. It's a whole team. That's an example of what is working for in the community that I live in, which is the region of Waterloo here in Ontario. And so having Aboriginal Health Access Centres have been really important for people to, number one, feel like they can access healthcare, that when they go there, they're going to be met with somebody who understands, who is going to respect their confidentiality, where they might have a physician or nurse practitioner, and they can actually have somebody who can oversee their healthcare needs. Within a center that says, okay, they might do an initial intake, and then they identify the potential services that will benefit that person's overall healthcare. Sometimes it is in the community advocating for housing. Sometimes it is advocating or navigating community care and personal service workers or PSWs, I guess. I'm not sure what. And so healthcare navigators have been really important in helping people navigate pretty complex systems, especially with ISC, like Indigenous Services Canada. They're what gets funded, what's not funded, how can you access counseling, can you get your prescription glasses paid for, what prescriptions, and if do they cover this or not cover this, and how can somebody advocate or help you navigate the different levels of healthcare. And I think patient navigators, when Indigenous health centers bring in a patient navigator, it makes a big difference, especially if somebody is like navigating outpatient services in a healthcare system. And so I think in the example of the Indigenous healthcare system here has been, I've seen it really benefit some of the people on the ground who are living in poor housing, who are struggling. They even provide transportation to clients and patients. Even if people need to get to a woman's ceremony or a healing ceremony, they have like elders in there. Healers come in. People can book appointments for healers and elders, and people that do energy work, people that are doing like holistic practices, footwork. So I feel like those are examples here where I actually see in this community health access and creating Indigenous holistic health access centers.
It's interesting when I listen to your description of that center that acts. It strikes me that it's really a vision of medicine, of health that's holistic, as we were saying already. But what I think is important in terms of kind of educating the government and educating the, is recognizing how a place like that works together and promotes the health and well-being of a community, how in the long run it actually saves government money, because it's really recognizing upfront the importance of this holistic vision. And to me, that's what I just find the Indigenous understandings of health and wholeness have so much to contribute to our understanding generally of healthcare and what it means. When we talk about healthcare systems, it just seems so kind of abstract almost, but we're really talking about human beings together, working together in teams to promote health and wholeness. And I just find Kathy's example is a beautiful example of that.
It's a very encouraging one to see that type of center and of service so well organized and coordinated also. I see that time has flown by. We only have about 10 minutes left. So I want to encourage anyone listening to write questions if you would like to have your question. I can read it here. And in the meantime, if no questions show up here, I think the last question that was burning my mind was, well, considering these big differences between the models of healthcare, can traditional healing and Western medicine work together? Do you think that that's possible, and how can this work together? So we have about 8 minutes left for this huge question.
Well, I mean, I'll just quickly speak, because the first thing I think about is that idea of two-eyed vision, or two-eyed seeing, I think. And then the other metaphor that comes to me is the story or the teaching of two lodges. And it seems to me that, yes, I think it is possible to work together. I think it happens all the time in good ways. I don't know about so much in the healthcare system, but maybe you have somebody again like Dr. Janet Smiley, who is, she's coming out of her tradition, but she's also working in the healthcare system from the Western scientific perspective. So though, there are many examples where I think those worlds can work together in a good way. They each have something important to contribute. I think the problem is that people have not, generally the system has not in the past recognized the tremendous contribution of Indigenous worldviews, Indigenous teachings. And I think we're witnessing that, listening to Kathy and her experience. I mean, I think that, and others, Janet and others in the healthcare system that are, are really able to work within those two systems. So I'll let Kathy speak so we don't run out of time.
Miigwech, Christine, I was going to say that too, so I'm not going to repeat that about the two-eyed seeing, but I also wanted to acknowledge I've seen the grandmothers. I went to a medicine camp over 4 years with grandmothers Kathy Bird and Edna Manitowabi, and Kathy Bird is a trained nurse and a Cree grandmother who works closely with the medicines, and she worked closely with the traditional medicines and people who had, there was a clinic where the two came together, right? And so our traditional medicines, of course we can work together because most of those medicines come from organic plants, and traditionally Indigenous people, we have always known that. And so the working with the medicines, whatever health issue it is, can also work collectively with mainstreams, the research and the development that's been done in areas of early diagnosis and detection, right? And I always say to people, yes, go to the hospital, go get early detection, go get a diagnosis. And if you don't want to take drugs and pharmaceuticals, then our medicine people can help you. So there's different ways that we have found to work together, and I think that we can take the best of both worlds and help to address some of the really important and critical health issues that are happening within First Nation communities.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Christine. There's a lot of there's a long way to go, but I think that we have some hope after today's discussion to some paths to cultivate, and I think some vision, like you were saying, Christine, some light to shed on these issues. There's a comment in the Q&A that says UNDRIP requires that Indigenous people should have the ability to create institutions of their own or participate in institutions of the state. I don't know what UNDRIP is.
UNDRIP, it's United
UNDRIP.
Nations the Declaration of DR. I forget what it's you say it,
the United Nations Declarations for the Rights of Indigenous Peoples.
Right, yeah.
Which is Indigenous peoples' right to sovereignty. Sovereignty of our land, sovereignty of our bodies, sovereignty of our culture, our languages, our all of those things. Yes, that we have, that Indigenous peoples have that right to create our own institutions or our own bodies. I don't want to say institutions, that's colonial, but our own ways of restoring our health care.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And I don't know, Corey, if you would like to say a few closing words before we end the conversation today.
Thank you, Kathy and Christine. My goodness, there's been so much. It's wisdom after wisdom after wisdom. I lost paper enough. I don't have enough paper to take down all my notes. I have about 12 things around me, and I was trying to take as much as I could. But this has been not just a fruitful and rich exchange. There was something beautiful about the dynamic, right? About asking questions and getting into the meat, as we may have, of what the world looks like around us, but it's been really constructive, not just underlying some of the issues and some of the problems that are at our door that some of us, I think, Valerie, you were mentioning, that we are willfully ignorant of and choose to remain in that space because it's easier to remain ignorant than it is to become proactive, right? There's that sense of being drawn into our responsibility that I thought was so wonderfully relevant in this discussion. I can't thank you enough, Kathy and Christine, for today, and Valerie for so masterfully, facilitating the discussion. It was so. I at one point I forgot that I was in a webinar. I thought I was at like a coffee table having a discussion, a really great discussion with people with such great qualities. So thank you so much to the both of you. To those participants who have joined us online, thank you for being with us. Please send any comments or questions or reflections about what you thought about today's event. There is a note in the chat for you to send your feedback. Please do that. Of course, come to the CBS website to get more information there. But thank you again, Valerie, Christine, Kathy, for just a really, really great time together. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Corey. Thanks,
Thank
Kathy.
you, Corey.
Thanks, Valerie.
Miigwech.
Miigwech.